In 1978, Argentina crowned itself world champion. But behind the confetti, 30,000 voices were missing. A general was murdered, a Swedish striker was kidnapped, and a 6-0 win still echoes with suspicion. This is the darkest and most Latin World Cup ever. I'm Arturo, and this is Latin Laura. From Latin America's history to mysteries and true crime, to local legends, whispering Latin intrigue. Every tale is triple verified in archives before it reaches your headphones. Hit subscribe. Fresh revelations drop every week, ready for your next campfire debate. They lit flares outside the Monumental, and for a breathless instant, the winter night looked like noon. Drums throbbed at the speed of blood. Paper ribbons floated like migrating birds. Voices, those stubborn Latin voices that outshout fear, rolled against concrete in waves that refused to break. The scene felt like a blessing cast in smoke. A few blocks away, another light never blinked. The lamps of a naval school where doors locked from the outside and the sea swallowed names. Hold both frames in one hand, and an entire tournament sharpens into focus. Here is the story of Argentina 1978, the most Latin of all World Cups. It unfolded under the iron shadow of a dictatorship that left more than 30,000 souls disappeared. Yet, amidst this political adversity, the drums still beat, the flag still waved, and resilience bled through every crack. It was a story of tragedy and survival, fear and fiesta, violence and poetry braided together. And through it all, football emerged as a powerful unifying force, reminding the world that even in the darkest of nights we can wrest joy from shadows and turn it into an act of cultural rescue. They say destiny sometimes arrives dressed as ceremony. On July 6, 1966, in the 35th FIFA Congress in London, the delegates raised their hands and awarded Argentina the right to host the World Cup of 1978. Mexico had also raised its hand, but 2 years earlier it had already secured 1970 and withdrew with a polite bow. That afternoon, FIFA wrote a triptych into history: 1974 in West Germany, 1982 in Spain, and, most dramatic of all, 1978 in Argentina, a South America that did not yet know the storms about to fall upon it. Argentina had knocked before. In 1938, when France was chosen, most of South America boycotted in fury, convinced the cup should have crossed the Atlantic. In 1956, Chile edged Argentina for 1962. In 1964, Mexico triumphed for 1970. Each rejection bruised national pride. So when London finally declared Argentina, it was as though the debt of decades had been paid. But history never gives Argentina anything cheaply. The years that followed were a carousel of presidents, decrees, and coups. Arturo Illia did nothing. Juan Carlos Onganía intervened in the Football Association. Alejandro Lanús declared the tournament a matter of national interest. Then democracy gasped back. Campora elected, then resigned, and Perón returned for one last round, creating a commission under his sinister minister, López Rega. And then, March 24th, 1976, another coup. Videla, Macera, Agosti, the national reorganization process, terrorism of state. Some generals thought the cup an unbearable expense. Others, like Macera, understood it as priceless theater. The latter won. Videla's pen created EAM-78, an autonomous war machine for propaganda dressed as football. General Actis, its first head, was assassinated within weeks. The shadow of his murder hung over the whole project, and Admiral Lacoste seized control. New stadiums rose in Córdoba, Mendoza, Mar del Plata. The Monumental swelled, Rosario Central was refitted, Vélez refurbished. The cup was militarized before a ball was kicked, and over it all loomed the contradiction. The infamous ESMA, the dictatorship's torture school, stood less than a mile from the Monumental. On match days, prisoners heard the roar of goals mingle with their own muffled cries. Hitler had Berlin 36, Mussolini had Rome 34. Now, Argentina 78 became our own mask of football, hiding the machinery of fear. Foreign reporters smelled the double life at once. Newspapers spoke of tango and sunshine, but whispered of censorship, of missing names in the newsroom, of figures that never came home. In 1977, Interior Minister Arguindeguy casually admitted that 5,618 people had disappeared, as if citizens were not bodies but misfiled documents. Abroad, protests stirred. Amnesty International printed its bitter slogan, "Football, yes, torture, no." In Paris, the boycott committee, COBA, spread posters across the city. The Netherlands debated. Sweden debated. And then came the episode that said more than any editorial, the brief abduction of Ralph Edström. On the eve of Sweden's debut against Brazil, the tall striker wandered into a Buenos Aires bar where a man who called himself a lawyer wept upon learning he was Swedish and whispered, "A free country." The next night, Edström was led from his hotel into a basement where a soldier in sunglasses sat waiting. They gave him coffee, asked nothing memorable, and released him. Edström would later link the incident to the disappearance of Dagmar Hagelin. The Swedish-Argentine teenager vanished into ESMA a year earlier. Abroad, Dagmar's name was on banners. In Argentina, it was a whisper. For Edström, one night was enough to feel the shadow. It was daily air. So the cup arrived like a play with two stages. One was dazzling. New stadiums, confetti, drums, goals. The other was drenched in shadows, censorship, kidnappings, the white scarves of the mothers circling the plaza. The regime wanted discipline, order, joy. What it revealed instead was the contradiction we in Latin America know by heart, that even when the ball rolls, ghosts walk beside it. César Luis Menotti, tall as a lamppost with a cigarette burning like a metronome, gathered 22 and shut the door. Not an easy door to close. Remember that future legends are once just boys, and in 1978, Diego Armando Maradona was only 17, a prodigy burning too bright too soon. The World Cup was in Argentina, the drums already warming, and yet César Luis Menotti cut him from the final list. Officially, it was simple. There were only 22 seats at the table, and in Diego's position, the competition was merciless. Villa, Valencia, Alonso, men with more years and political weight behind them. Unofficially, the air carried rumors of promises, pressures, even threats from generals and directors who whispered which names had to be there. Menotti told the boys it hurt him, that the decision was inevitable, but words do little when you've just been told your dream is no longer yours. Diego left that room in tears, not knowing how to face his father. Beside him, Humberto Bravo, another cut, tried to console him. "Don't cry. I'm 27. I won't see a World Cup. You'll see many." And so it was. But in that moment, the most significant number 10 in history was just a teenager, broken by exclusion in his own land, watching the Cup of 1978 pass him by. 4 months. Pasta slicked in oil replaced steak. Oxygen replaced folklore. Passarella welded the back line into something that looked like steel left in a river. Fillol trained as if he meant to catch bullets barehanded. Ardiles practiced acceleration until space seemed to part for him. Kempes, the tall one from the interior, wandered training pitches with the look of a man who heard the net calling his name. Mostly local, mostly league-born, a caravan of rivals asked to become a nation inside a dressing room. The encampment was not an escape from the world. It was the world boiled down to running, passing, and breath. The world watched and argued. Johan Cruyff, who had humiliated Argentina 4 years earlier, would not set foot on this country's grass. Others came anyway. Bertie Vogts shrugged that he had seen no prisoners. We in the terraces knew a witness can be blind if the lights are pointed away. But still, the gates opened, and the tournament began under the frost of June. June 2nd, 1978, Hungary, Monumental, frost brittle underfoot. 10 minutes, a Hungarian blade, Karoli Chapo, stabbing a goal and knocking the air out of 60,000 lungs. 4 minutes later, Leopoldo Jacinto Luque reacted first to a rebound and snapped fear in half. It wasn't only an equalizer, it was a thesis. Under this sky, victimhood would be rationed. For an hour, shadows chased shadows. Then Daniel Bertoni, off the bench with a knife between his teeth, burst through and settled the night. 2 Hungarians saw red. Nerves had begun to smoke. June 6, France. Platini, still young, already walking like a chess problem with legs. Penalty just before the break. Passarella stepping forward like a sheriff and lashing it home. An equalizer born from artistry. Bar, drop, finish reminded the hosts that Europe carried plenty of mirrors. Then Luque curved a ruthless strike from distance for 2-1. He waved from the track with a dislocated elbow so that family would not worry. The next morning brought a phone call sharp as glass. His brother had died driving to see him play. Despite this personal tragedy, Luque returned to the field, not because the state cared. He paid for coffin and doctors himself, but because his father spoke the Latin theology that outlasts politics. The only reply to death is choosing life, again and again. The team's resilience in the face of personal tragedy during the match against France is a testament to their determination and courage. June 10th, Italy. The duality of dictatorship and great football showed its face most clearly on the 10th day of the World Cup. That afternoon, Argentina lost to Italy by a single goal, a Bottega strike that sent the Albiceleste packing to Rosario instead of keeping them in Buenos Aires. It was a match played with freedom in the legs, both teams already qualified, both without the terror of elimination, yet it ended in defeat. And on that same day, in a sliver of ink almost invisible beside the avalanche of match reports, Clarín slipped a note that cracked the carnival's mask. Fueron liberados por el PEN 21 detenidos. 21 montoneros, suddenly freed by the executive's order. No explanation, no trumpet, just a sentence tucked between goals and player ratings. On the pitch, men ran with lightness, Olgin himself later saying it was their best performance despite the score. Off the pitch, the dictatorship continued its theater of mercy and menace, deciding who would walk back into the sunlight and who would remain swallowed by the dark. For one instant, football and politics stood shoulder to shoulder in the same day's newsprint, one shouting in headlines, the other whispering from the margins. And that whisper was enough to remind everyone that even in the middle of the drums and confetti, the cold hand of power still held the pen. To win was to remain in the capital. To lose was exile upriver. Menotti would say later that the journey saved more than legs. A new city, a crowd closer to the touchline. The air is thick with barrio vocabulary. Cups in Latin America never travel only across maps. They travel through dialects until they find the one that makes sense. June 14th, Poland, a name that had kicked the host down in 74. Kempes remembered his birthright. A header crashed from a Bertoni cross, then a penalty at the other end, and Fillol sprang like a question no striker knew how to answer, smothering Dana with a scream that gave the stadium new lungs. Ardiles ran half the field like a metronome, losing his patience, and slipped Kempes through for the second. A purer, harder team appeared, not one that waited for history to happen, but one that insisted on dictating paragraphs. June 18th. Brazil had been waiting for this moment. Beyond the murmur of Peru and the whispers that would soon surround June 21st, here was a chance to prove themselves directly against Argentina, the eternal mirror in which each side measures its greatness. On June 18th, after Argentina's opening win over Poland had reignited confidence across the nation, the Clásico Sudamericano arrived like a storm cloud over Rosario. The Verde Amarela still carried the weight of 3 world titles, with Leão in goal, Zico at the heart, Dirceu painting wide strokes, and Roberto Dinamita prowling the box. For Argentina, it was not just a match, it was the trial of truth. The truth, however, was ugly. Omar La Rosa remembered it as tension wrapped in boots, a repeat of the hard clash against Italy, a game of nerves and muscle where Menotti's dream of beautiful football could not take root. Daniel Bertoni called it a war, blow for blow, kick for kick, a duel in which whoever struck first would decide the verdict. Ardiles went further, lamenting that this was not football at all, but combat dressed as sport, 2 of the world's best reduced to fear of losing rather than hunger for creation. It was a South American paradox, so much artistry in the blood, so little allowed to breathe under the weight of rivalry. In the end, the scoreboard stayed blank, the air thick with fouls and missed chances. Oscar Ortiz squandered the clearest set up by Bertoni's cross, a miss that left a groan echoing across the terraces. Neither side broke through, neither could bend the other, and the group remained knotted. Argentina walked off with clenched jaws, Brazil with silent frustration. The tie left the shadow of Peru growing larger on the horizon, for it would not be artistry but mathematics, and perhaps something darker, that would settle Group B. They fixed June 21 on the calendar like a blade. Last round of Group B, second phase. Brazil and Argentina stood level on points, but Brazil held the cleaner arithmetic. Then came FIFA's scheduling, polished, official, and perfectly useful. Brazil would play first against Poland, Argentina would follow against Peru. On paper, this had been arranged months earlier. The host at 7:15 p.m., the other games staged at earlier hours to keep foreign TV audiences and local gates from cannibalizing each other. No one protested when the rule was drafted. West Germany had enjoyed a similar comfort in '74, but when the decisive night arrived and Brazil asked to kick off at the same time as Argentina, FIFA tightened its tie and said television could not be moved. Brazil beat Poland 3-1, and the numbers hardened into a sentence. Argentina must win by at least 4. It is one thing to chase victory. It is another to be told the exact size of your miracle. Peru, already eliminated, waited under the lights in Rosario. The stadium hummed with the sound of hope, a sound that in those years could be mistaken for pressure. Then came the visit. Before kickoff, President Jorge Rafael Videla entered the Peruvian dressing room with Henry Kissinger at his shoulder, bearing a message of brotherhood from Peru's own general, Francisco Morales Bermudez. In Latin America, speeches often carry more weight than they should and less truth than they claim. The players listened. The tunnel swallowed the moment. What followed belongs to football's heaviest drawer. Argentina 6, Peru 0. A scoreline so bright it threw longer shadows. The hosts reached the final by goal difference, stepping over Brazil with arithmetic sharpened by 6. The newspapers called it historic. The bars called it suspicious. The story did not end with the whistle. When Peru returned to Lima, the players met a hail of coins and tomatoes, the kind of verdict that often replaces proof. 10 days later, the junta in Buenos Aires signed a decree granting an extraordinary non-refundable credit to Peru. Accountants might call it aid. The street called it coincidence. Other stories multiplied. That Brazil had offered cash to Peruvians to fight harder. That local officials had sweetened Poland to trouble Brazil. That some Peruvians had been promised $5,000 a head. That some Argentines had their own envelopes ready. Kempes, with goals still drying on his boots, said Peru had chances, 2 inside 15 minutes, 1 kissing the upright, and that the night could have turned if the ball had obeyed a different law. Others, less charitable, pointed to tired legs, to a team frayed by matches every 3 days, to fissures between club clans inside Peru's camp. Years later, the chorus split into rival harmonies. Some Peruvian players called the match not normal, spoke of pressure, of threats, of strange decisions. They remembered Videla and Kissinger in the doorway and read the visit the way a man reads a hand at his collar. Others denied everything. No money, no pact, only a team overrun by a storm in blue and white. Quiroga, Argentine by birth and Peru's goalkeeper that night, swore he had not sold himself. If he had, he said, he would not be able to walk Lima's streets. Yet even he admitted that some teammates played strangely, and that one defender ducked on the 4th goal as if the net itself were a gun. Investigators and authors joined the dance. David Yallop wrote that Videla ordered Rear Admiral Carlos Lacoste to secure the needed result through Peru's dictatorship, $50 million, 35,000 tons of grain, a state-to-state bargain within the long shadow of Operation Condor. Later, Treasury Secretary Juan Alemán confirmed the donations, the kind usually reserved for floods or earthquakes. That same Alemán claimed a bomb went off at his house at the exact second Argentina scored the 4th goal and another at Lacoste's, as if the night itself wanted to choreograph coincidence. And still, denials kept their ground. Chumpetas insisted his team was never sold. Cubillas called the accusations inventions and pointed to form and fatigue, a waterspout of Argentina against a Peru already sliding. Jaime Duarte, Cesar Cueto, many others repeated the same refrain. No proof, no pact, only a beating. Meanwhile, Argentine players like Luque, looking back through older eyes, said they now understood how much they had been used, even if in that month they simply played. What do we do with a night like that in a continent like ours? We hold both truths in the same palm. The truth of a scoreboard that roared like a stadium becoming a storm, and the truth of a dressing room visit, of rumors that refused to die, of decrees signed 10 days too late. In Latin America, memory does not resolve cases. It keeps them alive. June 21, 1978, a date that still echoes like a chant and a question. Argentina reached the final. Brazil went home. Peru carried the shame, and the rest of us, who know how easily joy and fear can share a jersey, still argue, still sing, still remember. June 25th, final. Holland, light on Cruyff, but heavy with geometry, returned like a lesson that demands a retake. Tin-textured daylight. Confetti glued to cheeks. Rensenbrink prodded early. Fillol locked his near post with a padlock borrowed, perhaps, from an ironmonger's dream. Ardiles conducted angles. Luque posted up as if tree roots passed through boots, and Kempes slalomed while falling to write the first scoreline. The Dutch drew their protractor and found a seam. Nanninga, a substitute with a builder's face, headed truth across a sigh. Then a freeze frame that lives in every rewatch. A through-ball, a toe poke, a post, and history deciding that 5 centimeters would carry its soul in a different pocket. Extra time demanded receipts for 4 months of monastic life. Pasta paid off. Minute 105. A carom into chaos. Kempes through 2 men. The ball bounding, him bounding too, net forgiving all prior arithmetic. 10 later, Bertoni ripped a third, and the stands migrated toward heaven. Passarella lifted the trophy. The team circled. A city exhaled with the privacy of a prayer shouted by a crowd. A proper Latin chronicle never ends at the parade. It flips the cup to read the hairline cracks. A World Cup is a stadium inside a city inside a world. In that world in 78, a columnist wrote like a coach, and a colonel wrote like a PR firm. An organizing committee poured a decade's budget into 3 stadiums glossy enough to distract a lens. Editorials announced sovereignty over the Beagle. Sidebars scolded a reporter for the phrase campos de concentración. Radios chanted Kempes until tongues grew numb, while neighbors marked Thursdays with white kerchiefs. No arithmetic can reconcile those columns. The contradiction is not a stain to scrub. It is the fabric itself. Yet, memory likes irony, and it has one. The regime banked on a pageant that could be airmailed to the planet. Football handed ordinary people a license to gather. Gathering is a teacher no police officer can outshout. Songs that began as chants for blue and white shirts returned in later years as choruses for justice. Boys who learned to project their voices in June learned to march in spring. Stadium lights did not sanctify a nation, but they illuminated faces that had grown used to looking down. This is not absolution, it is topography. Joy here, guilt there, resilience creeping like grass between the two. Suspicion will always shadow the Peru match. Let it. History in this hemisphere is written in pen and pencil. Statements about grain, whispered flights, telephone orders, first half posts and second half avalanches, arithmetic printed before kickoff, alliances rehearsed by men who love badges. Ambiguity is not surrender. It is honesty about how power winds rope while a ball waits on a spot. The pitch often refuses to follow orders for an hour. That refusal belongs in the crest. As for the names, keep them like rosary beads. Fillol, Passarella, Tarantini, Olguin, Gallego, Ardiles, Bertoni, Ortiz, Kempes, Luque, Haussmann, and La Rosa. Keep the calendar intact. June 2nd, Hungary. June 6th, France. June 10th, Italy. June 14th, Poland. June 18th, Brazil. June 21st, Peru. June 25th, Holland. Keep the facts. Asynchronous kickoffs, a dictator in a visiting dressing room, a post that decided to be merciful, goals timed like thunderclaps, newspapers that minted superlatives like coins, terraces that outshouted official communiques. Keep the tone Latin, proud, suspicious, forgiving, merciless, never neutral. Menotti's paradox deserves a last candle. The romantic proved that beauty requires scaffolding. Artists were trained to run. Runners were taught to think. A national team emerged that looked like the nation at its best. Fierce, technical, mouthy, wired to the crowd like a street performer with a hat on the ground. That contribution does not erase questions inked in Rosario. It simply asserts that art was practiced there too, while the world watched and the river carried other messages to the sea. Return to the opening flare. Paper whirls over a penalty area. Somewhere behind those stands, a gate clangs shut. The trophy gleams. The photograph freezes. The future already walks toward a plaza, toward trials, toward the slow work of teaching names to stone. The host of 1978 was not the country people wanted. It was the country that existed. Inside that steel truth hides a gentler one. Even in a crooked house, a straight pass can be struck. Even in a dark time, the ball can find net. Even in a stolen age, a people can steal a moment back. That is Latin, as indelible as the sun on cheap paint. If someone asks, years later, what 5 centimeters change and what they cannot, answer plainly. 5 centimeters can reroute a result. They cannot erase the chorus that learned how loud it could sing, how complex it could love, how stubbornly it could remember. Suspicion, pride, grief, joy. Those 4 keep their seats in the same section, still waiting for the whistle, still reminding anyone who dares to listen that football in that winter was a verdict and a veil, a hymn and a howl, and that the world's most Latin World Cup is not a myth to be solved, but a melody to be carried, imperfect, unshakable, alive. Muchas gracias. Thanks for trekking the hidden trails of Latin America with me. If tonight's story unsettled you, subscribe and ring the bell, because Latin America's darkest stories are far from over.